To introduce Lydia Millet, who's a writer whose work I deeply admire. She's written a gazillion novels. How many actually?
I think 11 books of fiction for adults.
Okay, 11 books of fiction for adults. And I've read all of them except for George Bush, The Dark Prince of Love, which I'm saving for a special occasion, like the apocalypse. You know, Lydia works for the Center for Biological Diversity as her day job. She's very interested in issues about ecology and about the survival of our species and some other species, which we might mention. When I say that, it sounds like her work is going to be kind of serious and polemical. You wouldn't know that from reading her work. It's very funny, for starters, and the fate of the planet dying and humor are not things you think are going to go together naturally, but in her work they kind of do. She's got a very piquant sense of humor. Her prose is very punchy and surprising, and the writer who she most reminds me of is Joy Williams, who, as turns out, taught the only workshop she ever took. Is that true?
Well, as a grad student, before I dropped out.
Before she dropped out. She is not a conventional MFA type person, which I think she'll talk to us about later. But in any case, I think her work is doing really important kinds of syntheses of various ideas that are in the culture, and in a way that is not pretentious, but is really kind of felt and personal, and I'm a big fan. Please welcome Lydia Millet.
Thank you very much for those kind words. Oh, I do have my glasses. Okay, I need my glasses. I just recently realized I was middle-aged. I actually had no idea previously. And it turns out if you're middle-aged, you have to wear reading glasses. It's just the law. Okay, so I thought I'd read a couple things. Don't worry, I won't go on. I'll try not to go on too long. I generally go on too short, but I'm going to read a bit from the most recent novel I had out, which is called Sweet Lamb of Heaven. Is this making little horrible sounds? Should I be farther from it? Yeah. And then I'll read, and that's not so funny. So then after that, I'll read something from my new collection of stories, which is a little less serious. And hopefully will make things feel, well, not so serious. Except that I can't actually find, did anyone steal any of my pages from my novel? Anyone? Let's just see.
If you want a copy, we can get you a copy.
Yeah, do you have a copy of my,
Yeah, we can.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I've got it. I'm fine. Just kidding, yeah, that's super funny. Okay. Yes. All right, so I'll read just a bit from, honestly, from the very first chapter of this novel, Sweet Lamb of Heaven, which actually has a lot to do with, thank you very much. It has to do a lot with sort of the sort of political dualism in this country between those who believe in science and those who believe in a literal reading of the Bible or some version of that. And so I sort of wrote this book to try to look at how you might conceive of God, a God that wasn't either one or the other of those things. But it's actually just, it was then marketed as a, I think it was like a political thriller or like something like that, a domestic thriller, I can't even remember, psychological thriller. Something like that, because it does involve this sort of high-stakes situation between a woman and her estranged husband involving their kid. But I'll just read from the very beginning so you really don't need much context. So it's called Sweet Lamb of Heaven, and this first chapter is called Hallucinations Even in the Sane. When I insisted on keeping the baby, Ned threw his hands into the air, palms forward. He looked like a mime climbing a wall, one of the few times I've ever seen him look clumsy. Then he dropped his hands and turned away, shaking his head. It was a terminal shake. Afterward, his schedule got fuller, his long work hours longer, his attention more completely diverted. And I have to admit, it wasn't just him who turned away. After we differed on that point, the point concerning the baby, I began to give up on Ned, too. So I was alone preparing. It had been an accident, technically more his fault than mine, but who's haggling? And once it happened, I felt I needed to accept it. I wanted to. I drove by myself to buy the various infant containers. I chose the doll-sized pieces of newborn clothing, set up a nursery and glued stars on the ceiling. I crept in at night sometimes to see how they glowed. I went alone to doctor's appointments to listen for the heartbeat and see the first pictures. And when the time came, I went through labor with mostly just medical staff keeping me company. Ned did stop by the hospital, apparently, and spent some time talking on his cell in the lounge, but he stepped out again for a work lunch. Later for work cocktails, which I myself enjoy. And finally, for a late work dinner. After dinner, he drove home and went to sleep. None of this was too far beyond the pale, I guess, when it comes to unfortunate marriages. After about 20 hours, I lay against the pillows holding her slippery body. Her eyes, against my expectation, were wide open. And there was a perplexing chaos of sound in my ears. Too many voices in the room for the number of people. Soundtracks that overlapped. A kindly nurse was telling me about the other babies he'd seen born with their eyes open when a stream of words intruded, covering hers. Or covering his, as the case might be, before the copy edit. Anyway, I heard it most distinctly when the nurse paused. Later, I'd hear volumes and forget almost all of it, but the first phrase I picked out stayed with me despite my exhaustion. It started out as a string of foreign words, only one of which resolved, to my ear, into anything recognizable. Something like power, or poa. And then it was English, the living spring from the dead. Delirium was what I thought, and I dispensed with it by falling fast asleep. It was only when I woke up later, and the baby was brought back to me, also awake, that the stream of chatter started up again, and was impossible to ignore. At first, I was mostly irritated and went to get my ears looked at. Once, when I was a kid, I'd had an infected ear and heard a wavy music when I pressed my head against the pillow. Maybe this had a physical explanation. Maybe some ear-brain interface was being disrupted. But my ears checked out fine. The baby didn't enjoy the doctor's visit, and the voice talked on, only for me, of course, throughout her noisy crying. Next, I made an appointment with a neurologist and insisted on an expensive scan. Nothing. For weeks, I combed through psychology case studies, ready to discover the evidence against my sanity. I read up on postpartum depression, though I didn't feel depressed. Of course, I might be in denial, I knew. I had a newborn baby, after all, and a husband who had no time for either of us. But I didn't feel sad. I suffered from no flatness of affect. I was tired and confused. I felt besieged by the noise. But it was frustration, not despair. I also gave schizoid conditions due consideration. No mother wants a woman with psychotic features bringing up her child, even if that woman is her. So reading accounts of patients who heard voices became my avocation for a while, since, as it turns out, mental illness isn't required to hallucinate. Hallucinations, even in the sane, are quite common. They accompany certain drugs and medicines and an impressive list of diseases. They can be caused by blindness or sensory deprivation, or even seem to come out of nowhere. A stream of advice is often heard by people in extremis, fighting injury or the elements. Voices are heard by the sane in wartime or other under forms of duress. Prison or isolation or grief. Sometimes the voices have no obvious cause, their origins buried in the electric labyrinth of the brain. I was prepared to accept the hallucination hypothesis. The baby's presence, her rapt attention caused me to hallucinate voices speaking to me. But I was curious beyond that and needed to cover my bases. I also went to worst-case scenarios, to the bizarre and outlandish. I studied the occult, including demonology, for instance. I spent hours on the internet reading myths and legends of demonic possession. I made trips to the library, the baby snug in her carrier, and moved from articles about people with auditory hallucinations to those who identified their visitors very specifically, brooking no disagreement. Demons, they said. They saw demons with claws, horns, and pointed teeth, of course, but often demons appeared in the shape of seductive women, and yet others were amorphous shapes that shifted beneath the faces of loved ones. Briefly, those faces would distort, then swiftly resume their devious guise, pull over themselves the skin of normalcy. Or people heard demons that had no physical form but only spoke, mostly in biblical tongues like Aramaic or Hebrew. Experts were consulted, and that was often their verdict. What the demon-visited persons were hearing was Aramaic or Hebrew or Greek. The demons tended to speak in dead scripts, as though frozen in time, in the time of early Christianity. The demons clung to the old, reluctant to embrace the new. I was glad Lena, the baby's mouth, didn't move when the words issued, as in some possession stories. Because it was only sound and words, invisible, the experience also conjured TV shows involving ESP. I looked into spoon-bending hoaxes and watched shows that featured ghost-finding teams who crept through haunted houses trying to recapture stray ectoplasm. I was worn down by the elements of my routine, the stream of words and my bewilderment during the days, the nights half sleepless, a mesh of hours spent fitfully dozing or nursing my daughter when she woke up. Ned had moved out of our bedroom while I was pregnant and never moved back. Claiming his restless sleep would bother me. Often he didn't come home at all in those first months when Lena's crying disturbed the nightly peace, but stayed over at the office. It wasn't long before I began to understand that at the office was a euphemism. And when the baby was sleeping, but I couldn't sleep, I wallowed in pulp fiction. I read thick paperbacks set in old houses where the devil took the form of flies and buzzed on window panes, or in upscale pre-war apartment buildings in Manhattan, where babies were fed evil baby food and raised by Satan cults. Plus, there were the movies about antichrists and child possessors, the one with the black-haired boy named Damien, the one with the blank-faced girl who floated over her bed rasping obscenities. When I was too tired to read, with the baby mostly sleeping and the speaker fallen silent, I'd curl up in front of the screen with cheese popcorn. But in the end, the B-movie fiends were too showy for me to take seriously. Almost self-parodies. Besides, the stream of words wasn't malicious, and my daughter committed no alarming actions. She ate and slept, lay bundled in my arms. Time passed and she rolled over, sat up, crawled, also gurgled and drooled. She never fixed upon me a bold, sinister eye. So by and by I let the demons go. Telepathy I dismissed out of hand. Schizoaffective disorders I further renounced. I went with the hallucination theory. And this is a quote. Hallucination has the qualities of real perception. Vivid, substantial, and located in external space. It's distinct from a delusional perception in which correctly sensed stimuli are given additional, often bizarre, significance. Wikipedia 510, 2009. People with migraines see colors and shapes fading and forming anew on the wall. Others with visual hallucinations believe strangers are sitting beside them dressed in old-fashioned garb. Next to these people's apparitions, my own affliction didn't seem so grave. It was true the disturbance was constant, and I didn't find an identical case in the articles I read, but this struck me as more or less a technical detail. At first I called it the voice, as others like me did, because I wasn't alone. There were whole support groups given over to non-psychotics who heard things, including a so-called Hearing Voices movement, which is real. Its mission to empower chronic voice hearers. There were affirming listservs. But I avoided them studiously. I began to write in this Word file instead, a diary whose sporadic rambling texts I'd tinker with for years. Over time, I redacted, adding and subtracting until they made a narrative that clarified my own story, at least to me. I spoke to no one about what I believed I heard. I sought out no company in my infirmity. Where we live now, myself and my daughter, is a seaside motel in the off-season. We're on the edge of rocky bluffs, so I can see a car coming when it's a speck on the long gravel road. There are few guests this time of year. In summertime, they get the kind of tourists who, says Don, the motel manager, bicker sharply over the bright orange sandwich crackers in the vending machine. Ray, advisability of purchasing. But in the wintertime, it's quiet here, and there are weekly rates. The carpets aren't much to write home about, having an ashy cast. The tables in the rooms are brown formica with black cigarette burns. Our shower curtains are mildewed. I like their pale blue imprint of daisies. I also like the cliffs, the rocks, the trees, and the gray water stretching to the east. I like the sharp nearness of pine needles against a blurry sheen of sea. And my little girl loves it. She loves the people and the place. Small events make her giddy with pleasure. She spins, cartwheels, races, and laughs easily. She doesn't have much, but she doesn't need much. She has her books and toys and art supplies. Some of the toys are old and bedraggled, since she doesn't want to throw out anything. The second I suggest a disused toy might be taken to the charity bin in town, she feels a rush of protectiveness and clings pathetically, lavishing praise upon the object that had been utterly forgotten till then. Watching her protect a ratty mouse, a dog-eared, broken-spined, finger-smeared picture book, it's often possible to believe that everything in the world is precious, that each humble item that exists has a delicate and singular value. It's possible to believe that all matter should be treated tenderly. Okay, that's the end of that book reading. So that was the super hilarious one, and now I'm going to read the really serious one. So this is a book of short stories that's going to come out next year, and it's sort of pulled together by this one realtor. It all happens in Los Angeles. This one woman who's a realtor and sells houses generally to very wealthy people, or she tries to sell expensive houses to people who aren't wealthy enough. And but then it has all these different stories that are from the points of view of people she runs into in her lives. And this particular story is about this teenage guy who's just suffered an unpleasant divorce between his parents, and his father's left his mother for a much younger woman. And I'm actually not going to read the part that's particularly nasty. I didn't print it out just in case there were young, innocent people among you. I see this is not the case. But he stages this whole scene for the realtor when she comes by with prospective buyers for his mother's house, because he doesn't want the house to sell. So he sets the scene so that they'll open the door of his bedroom while he's masturbating. And they do, and that all works out really disgustingly. Anyway, this is after he's kind of displeased them enough so that they leave his mother's house, his house, and he's left alone in the house. He's cutting school, so he's got the whole place to himself. And it's called To Think I Killed a Cat, which is from a Sex Pistols lyric. When he was little, sometimes they'd gone to parties without him. Beforehand, she'd let him watch her dress. Nothing too perv. She always had a lacy slip-on by the time she let him in. He used to watch her put up her hair, like in the movies. Rich kids watch their mothers get ready. Good feeling. Dinner parties and evening wear. She'd been so deaf with bobby pins it looked like sleight of hand. Magic, he called it then. He flashed to one time when her long hair, in the space of a few seconds, was transformed into a great shining round atop her head. That shit looked elegant, like Audrey Hepburn. Magic, Mama! She picked him up and twirled him. He'd been so small. Hard to believe. He held one lipstick, then another. He sat down in her chair. If he were more cross-dressing, he'd cover his face in all her makeup shit, but that wasn't his bag. Though true, it would be perfect maternal horror show. He'd freak her out when she came home. If he was done up all clownish and faux femme, that'd be a fast ride to prescribed counseling. Though his mother would also say, like she had about that neighbor kid, gender fluidity is perfectly natural. Still, counseling would be called for, which he, of course, would never attend. You don't want to hurt me, Jimmy. I know you don't. You know how much I love you. You're all I'm living for. There were also perfumes, bottles dusty. The deadbeat used to give her those. He picked up a bottle, spritzed here and there. You could watch the vapor descend. If he was more stoned, he'd spritz them till they were all empty. She'd never know. Didn't use them. Just kept the bottles there like rows of soldiers keeping watch. Shit, yeah, slight clouds. They settled on the vanities counter, dulling the brown shine, darkening the denim over his knees. That was the smell. One of the perfumes was the same the house-selling woman wore. It made him remember, it made him want to remember. He couldn't reach it. Back when he wasn't old enough to know himself. That was when it was from. Velud arbor ita ramus. He likes Latin, by the way. Just like the tree, so is the branch. Never, never. She showed her sadness like a split bone poking out of her skin. Compound fracture. A form of nakedness that could never be attractive. Well, not him. I show no bones, he said aloud. The guy with the beer belly, who was one of the prospective buyers, had it wrong. Not hatred. He didn't feel hatred, just anger. There was a difference. One was like rock, the other fire, the ancient elements. Sure, fire burned. It was supposed to. It scorched and made stuff black. Everything brown or black or ash gray. Burn and scorch, throw flames, spray paint. Tag everything, Holmes. He owed no apologies. And anyway, that tint was real. The world was covered in it. The world, when you looked at it coldly, was tinted with anger. The screech of rubber on asphalt, metal, and concrete. He was letting that beer belly Santa guy give him a lump of coal. This down feeling. Forget it. No, had Santa brought it, though? Or had the coal been sitting there already? The coal had been sitting there since paterfamilias had left, sowing his seed in younger soil. The Dadsters cliches weren't ironic. He really meant that shit. Himself, he'd stopped believing in Santa by first grade. The big kids down the street gave him the 411. All harsh, like, fucking Santa, you must be a moron. Too bad. When you believed, the world was tinted differently, like magic, Mama, and then she lifted you. Because you were small, you could be held, flown through the air, and delighted. Like that single moment was the same as forever. Back then, you didn't even worry about feelings. You hadn't learned to pity yet. You didn't need anger if you didn't feel pity. He had to do something. Doing, never lately among preferred activities. And yet, if the shoe fit, but what could he even do? She liked flowers, his mother. Adored flowers, she once said. Simple, easy, not asking so much, was it? But she never got him, not anymore. She was like a baby bird on the sidewalk, flapping with broken wings. When he thought about her, he was close to feeling that brittle snap himself, his own wrist, or a leg cracking. It wouldn't be the pain he minded, but the helplessness. Bullshit. He had her card. That shit now he could do. Not one bunch, not even 10, a house of flowers. True, they were strapped for cash, ergo, selling the house. But she said they were in bankruptcy. She said they were headed for Chapter 11. Like volume at 11, just like that vintage Spinal Tap hilarity. Turn the volume up to 11. He'd Googled they forgave all debts in Chapter 11. Part of the reason he didn't feel so bad about the coy cheerleader, that's a porn girl he watches. It was just digits into the morass, drop in the ocean. Okay, so several drops. That was the plan, nothing fancy, plain and simple, house full of flowers. Not cut flowers, because they died too fast. They'd die all at once and turn the house into a brown forest of death. Too depressing. No, flowers in pots, that plant place she liked on Sunset, Silver Lake, he'd bring them back in truckloads. What did he have, 3 hours? Or 4 if she worked late? Maybe he'd have them delivered, money was no object. When she walked in, 1,000 blooms. No gray or brown, they're orange, yellow, and red. Transit umbra lux permanent. Shadows pass, but the light remains. A part of her, sure, would be quite amply pissed. The rest of her would remember, even when he was gone, even when he'd moved out too old to live at home, for all the time after, when she'd have to be alone. He went down to the garage, took the keys off the hook, and got into the work truck, the only solid thing Lord Vader had left them. Waited as the garage door cranked up, waited longer as a nanny passed on the sidewalk with a stroller in front of her and a little kid toddling behind. The rich parents were the only even half smart ones. Outsourcing. He never got what was in it for parents. You saw them everywhere, fussing around their kids, doing dumb, small shit. Always bent over, fastening things, or unfastening them, or wiping the offspring, pushing or pulling them, sitting them in small chairs, rolling them, swinging them, feeding them with small spoons. Servants for no money. There was a word for that. Weird how everyone wanted to act wild, then, in the next breath, tame. It happened overnight. You partied, then you got married and turned in your balls. You lined up to turn them in. Eagerly packaged them, tying a bow on top. If you didn't have kids, there was still a chance maybe, because even married, as long as you didn't have kids, you could still keep doing drugs, like go out a lot. Nursery, it said on the sign. Like the little plants had their own rattles and cribs. But inside, it was disappointing. There weren't as many flowers as he'd expected. There were mostly leaves and stems, green parts. Even the flowers were mostly lame. Not like starburst, not like glamour. They just sat there. God damn, nothing was ever fucking splendid. Never splendid. God damn. Was he supposed to go home with a bunch of ass bushes? Pots of ass dirt? Bullshit. He kicked a pot, hurt his toe. Looked closer. The blooms on it were seedy and bluish. Agapanthus. Stevies Wonder. Sun to part sun. Hybrid. Seriously, a plant named for Stevie Wonder? Sick. Jeremy? No way. No. The new wife, Laura, pregnant as shit. He said, grunting, ape-like. Jeremy, hey! It's so great to see you. You still haven't been by the house, but what are you doing in a garden store? She reached out and hugged him, her bag sliding off her shoulder and hitting him as the baby bump nudged where it should never go. The floor slanted down, plus she was just the wrong amount shorter than him. So wrong. Through a veil of skin and blubber, his fetal half-sister was barely 3 inches from his D. He looked past the new wife's shoulder at a fat frog. It was a planter thing, like made out of China or whatever, and out of it stuck a bunch of those ugly flowers you saw on cement doorsteps, like wrinkled, like a pylon color orange. The frog's bulgy, heavy-lidded eyes made it look sly and evil, like it would slurp out a tongue and gulp your head. Nothing, he said, pulling back. Dad here? At work. I wanted to surprise them with some new plantings. I'm not actually putting them in. I can't even touch my toes, just buying them, for the gardener. How about you? You running an errand? It was wrecked anyway. Dumb idea. He shook his head. I should go. Hey, will you do me a favor first? She asked, and winced like asking hurt a bit. Can you come with me and pull that cart and maybe load my plants into the car? Like 5 minutes, that's it, I promise. He'd come for the sake of his mother. Now here he was, serving public enemy number 1. Normally he didn't say much to the new wife, safer that way. She acted nicey nice, plus she actually seemed to mean it, so it was hard to hate her guts once she got all up in your grill. Ergo, he kept his trap shut. Vir sapit gui pagua loquitur. He is wise, who talks little. But now she'd cornered him. He grabbed the handle of the plant wagon, walking behind her to the parking lot. It reminded him of the old radio flyer he used to pull around his stuffed animals in. His favorite was a camel that smelled bad from having its foot sucked. Where had the camel gone? Of course, you got too old for toys and didn't use them anymore. All that was fine. But where was the camel? In a landfill somewhere. He loaded the plants for her. They were boring. In the background, the child bride chattered on about him coming to dinner, how the dadster would be, quote, over the moon to see him. Total bullshit. His father hadn't been over the moon in his life. Over a slut's ass cheeks, maybe. His eyes were dead like a shark's. Flowers filling the house. What a cheesy idea that had been. Before, it had seemed kick-ass. Now, cheesy and stupid. Clearly a Mary Jane moment. Slamming down the SUV hatch, he saw a blur of movement along some bushes near his feet. A cat, small, gray, with patchy fur, looked homeless. Did it smell homeless? Could a cat get BO? "Oh my God, is that a kitten?" She went scrabbling after it, but she couldn't bend over far enough. Chick was basically a human water balloon dangling and wobbling on a stick. "Stand back," that thing could burst. She made a wheezing noise, then staggered sideways against her car door. He'd ask if she was okay, but it wasn't in the bylaws. Whenever it randomly occurred to him to act normal/human to her, he thought of the dadster hitting that, made him wish he had the talent of spontaneous puking. Slowly, she righted herself, mouth breathing. "That poor little guy's going to get run over," she said. "Don't you think? All that traffic, like 20 feet from here? Oh my God, it's just a kitten." It was small, sure, but looked ancient. A cat Gandalf. Merlin, a wrinkled graybeard. If it was human, it'd be bent over and carrying some kind of gnarled staff, like gumming and mumbling. Luckily, it wasn't. Say what you like about a decrepit cat, it was still better than a decrepit human. It faced away from them, tail waving, head under a bush, and then turned around with something in its mouth. Said Laura, "Oh no, is that a little mouse?" Child Bright thought flea-bag feral cats were cute kittens, and she thought moldy hot dogs were itty-bitty mice. She thought his father was a great guy. He could see the packaged, greasy litter under the hedge. "It's like a Hebrew national," he said. She looked relieved. "Hey, but won't you come over later, please? Just come have dinner with us. It'd be so great." He shrugged. She kept staring at him and smiling, all hopeful, like she was hanging on his answer. Finally, he did a half nod, grudging. That way, if she tried to hold him to it, he had a way out. What'd they call it in the CIA? Deniability? Plausible deniability? On the way home, he saw a billboard with a puppy on it. Maybe that was what he should have gotten, a puppy. His mother was allergic to cats, but not to dogs. His father never let her have a dog when they were married, but she was always drawn to other people's. Scratched them behind the ears, obsessively bought gourmet treats for them. Once she'd driven a platter of leftovers to the pound to give to the homeless pit bulls, waiting to be put to sleep. But the pounds didn't want it, something about too much cream. So she threw out the platter right there at the pound. After she said to him, "I mean, this is exactly what's wrong with the world." Maybe what she needed wasn't anything like flowers. Maybe that was like a Band-Aid. Some people let their babies cry for hours just to teach them to shut the fuck up. Probably worked. But then the babies grew up and turned into psychos. Still, maybe what she needed was tough love. It was too late for her to turn psycho anyway. Late onset psycho wasn't really a thing. Her shrink didn't do shit was what it sounded like to him whenever she told him the stuff the shrink had said. Her shrink just basically agreed with her. He drove the truck into the garage again. Her car was there. She was home. In the kitchen, she stood by the sink. She had cooking stuff out, a pan and some noodles, but she wasn't cooking yet. The water was running and running, just flowing right down the drain, but all she did was stand staring out the window, her hand frozen on the tap. You'd think something amazing was happening outside, like a naked marathon. "I'm going over there," he said abruptly. He opened the fridge, peered around for sodas. She always said they were bad for his skin, but he'd stashed a couple cans. "Going?" she asked, her little girl voice distant. "To his house, for dinner." The tap was still running and she didn't turn around. He caught a glimpse of the telltale red and white logo, pushed aside a lead burrito in tin foil. Closed the fridge door, popped the tab. The dadster was an asshole, fully certified, but life went on. Actually, it could be funny to watch his dickhead personality play out, like comedy. If you put yourself outside it like you were watching a movie, then shit, it could really crack you up. Step outside, Holmes, then laugh like a hyena. Plus, the child bride tried to be nice to him 24/7. That baby mama worked hard. She had fresh skin, a peaches and cream complexion, even fat with the fetal intruder. She was a yummy mummy. No one could deny it. He could step outside himself and laugh, but his mother could never. She didn't know how. He went up behind her, reached out with his left hand, and turned the water off. She was still staring out the window. Any second, she'd start crying. He knew the signs. "I went out to get you flowers," he said. It made him nervous to say it now. It was so hokey. But he forced himself. "But none of them were good enough, so I didn't get any. Sorry." Anyway, then that girl Laura showed up and made me carry plants in her car and nagged at me for like 10 straight minutes to come to their house tonight, so I had to say yes. She basically tricked me. It was a lie, but a white lie. Still, Enough tough love for now. Just going over there was bad enough. It's good, honey, she whispered, nodding. No, you should go. It's healthy. But he was supposed to be angry, wasn't he? He did the angry. She did the sad. Division of labor. It's good for you to spend time with your father, she said. Turning away, she lifted the back of a hand to her face, maybe wiping a tear, maybe not, couldn't see. I will, but I don't want to, he said. That, at least, he could give her. Wasn't a house full of flowers, but better than nothing. You're sweet, but you don't have to hate him to be loyal to me. Go, have a nice meal. And if you have to get stoned, wait till you get home. I will, he promised. The dadster typically smelled it on his breath and went Republican. Droned on about how stoners would never bring home the big bucks. Did he always plan to be an underachiever? How many spare brain cells did he have to waste by killing them? He would 100% wait. He thought the words, a solemn dignity, like a bolt from the blue, inspiration. He would be dignified from now on. His earlier midday self, first jacking off, then flaunting it, was hereby dismissed. That was the old him. This was the new. A solemn dignity. A second cousin of his with Down syndrome had gotten baptized as an adult, if you could call her that when her mind was 8 years old till death. Point was, she'd wanted to be a Catholic, though her whole family was regular WASPs, because she liked the saints, the stained glass windows, and, as his mother said, gruesome depictions of the crucifixion. So she worked hard to learn the lines or whatever, and the parents sent out fancy invitations with gold letters stamped on them, and he had to go. His mother made him wear a suit. At the time, he'd been pissed before they went, because if his cousin hadn't had Down syndrome, he could have stayed at home. Nobody would have given a crap. Baptism, teenage whim, they would have said. You could bet on it. But she did have Down syndrome, so on went the tie that felt like it was choking him and the gay shoes that pinched. In the church, she was dressed in a snow-white robe and smiled without end. She beamed. His whole life, he could swear he'd never seen anyone look that happy. Do you renounce Satan, the author and prince of sin? I do. I renounce him, he muttered under his breath, exiting the kitchen with the soda can in his grip. What, sweetie? Nothing. And all his works? I do. Okay, thank you. I'll stop there. So did we want to do anything after this, or?
Yes, I do. Anybody have any questions for our visitor? I'm sure she'll entertain questions, comments, complaints, praise.
Indeed, anything.
What was the name of that collection?
It's called Fight No More. Yeah, it's going to come out next year, so it's not out yet. Yeah.
Nothing?
That was the only question, you guys. There's not even an insult, some sort of like critique. You guys are very generous. Yes.
How did you create that voice? How did you work?
It's just me. It's just, you know, it's just like totally me. It's like autobiographical. And yeah, so, I don't know. The collection it started out as this sort of thing that was more esoteric than how it ended up. It started out being kind of I wanted to make it be about how sort of avant-garde and sort of rebel art gets co-opted and just commodified and co-opted by the mainstream and stuff like that. And that's why we have stuff like, actually you didn't see that much of it, but there's a lot of like Sex Pistols and stuff in the earlier part of the story. And like each of the stories has some sort of piece of art of some kind or another that's just become money sort of in it. But you wouldn't know that if you read the collection now. You'd never see that in it. I mean, it's there, but you wouldn't see it. So it just became a collection about all these different people. And this character who maybe seems in some ways offensive or something, at this point in the story, he's actually, like all the characters I ever write who seem on the surface annoying or offensive, and what he does sort of turn out to be someone at least I love, like by the end of the collection. He's actually truly kind and generous and all these things. But it's sort of following this different bunch of interconnected characters who many of them seem, and some are like genuinely troubled. There's a pedophile. There's a whole like pedophile story and stuff that where no one is redeemed, actually. There's no redemption in that story. But a lot of the stories are about these characters that seem, I don't know, off-putting at first, but you actually sort of learn to or at least I learned to like by the end. I know that doesn't answer your question, but it's the best I can do. Total autobiography. Yeah.
Southern California, did you grow up there, or did you spend time there? Or?
I did not grow up there. I grew up in Canada, but I lived in LA for a while, and I set a lot of my books there. My brother and sister both have families there now, so I still spend a fair amount of time there, but I've written, not exclusively, but like maybe half my books are set there, because I find LA to just be this perfect, perfect setting for the American extreme, kind of. I think I actually really like LA in many ways, but it also is just, I don't know, it's just a perfect symbol of all that's terribly wrong with us and a few things that are right. So, yeah, so I said a lot of things in Southern California. Yeah.
So do environmentalists read you? You work for this major organization, and your work is so much about extinction and species and the planet, and I just wonder if they even know about you, or whether the work is like kind of too literary for them. Or?
That's actually a good question, because there's not, when I first moved from like Manhattan to the middle of the desert outside Tucson, where I live now in Arizona, I just despaired of, I felt like enviros didn't read any literary fiction. I felt like there was this total cultural schism between people who were sort of even aware of the extinction crisis and climate change. And really, I have to say, at that time, there was. Like, no one in any kind of literary circle in Manhattan, and I knew plenty of folks there, no one was interested in that. No one was interested in climate change or in extinction and writing about that. And really, they were as interested, I'd have to say, as the right. The left, the sort of progressive left, was interested as the right in denial of some of these just incredibly powerful forces in our time. And I kind of felt despairing about the fact that there were these enviros who were totally enmeshed in those issues, and this sort of cultural intelligentsia that apparently just thought it was totally uncool to talk about this stuff. And it's starting to change, as you all know, but there's still a lot of room to move in that, and that really is there's this kind of schism, I think. We're a country where, we're a pretty siloed cultural left, where different parts of the left have until recently, and I think actually Trump might serve as a kind of fulcrum to change this, I think, maybe, if we're lucky, but parts of the left have just been quite dismissive of each other, and certainly environmentalists and literary creators, culture producers on the East Coast especially, were totally disinterested in each other, and both of them have huge blind spots, both cultures or subcultures. So I still don't know. It is true now that more people that I encounter have read something of mine or whatever who are like hippies, but still I'm not a hippie. I'm not like the hippie go-to writer of any kind. Right. Yeah, I've written some harsh things about hippies over the years, but but you do encounter more people who are interested in those matters, who read sort of literary fiction that touches on these things, including my own. But yeah, I'd say it's still things are still pretty isolated from each other in the culture, I feel. Yeah.
So I'm assuming you have a pretty full career in addition to being prolific. How do you do that?
Yeah, so I don't get a lot of time to write. I was telling this to the workshop I was with today, but I don't get a lot of time at a time to write. So, I'm really lucky if I get an hour or two in a day. And generally it's more like I have to not write much during the week and just write for like 3 hours on the weekend. But luckily I do sort of write and read fast. So when I actually do it, I get stuff done. You know what really helps is to smoke a lot of cigarettes. I will say, like that, I'm not doing that right now, but I wish I were. Because I can write like easily 1,000 words in a day if I'm just smoking and drinking just a lot. Unfortunately, I'm trying just to limit myself to the drinking at the moment. But so for me, like it really does. It's nice when you can get these blocks of time and I don't usually get those, and I don't know, I feel like I don't get enough done, and I feel like I'm just not getting enough done. But, I guess I do publish books, with some kind of regularity and stuff.
11.
But I feel like I could do it, I could do much better. It's sad.
How much better? What's your target?
But that wouldn't be about the number of books. My goal is really just to write a book one day that I truly hold in high esteem. Don't we all have that goal, and I think, I'm not sure I'll ever achieve that before I die, and probably not afterward either. But I do think I'm just the kind of person who's never satisfied with the work they do and always thinks, well, you can do better than that, and so that's where I am still, hoping to write a good book. Yeah. Thank you for asking, though.
So, one more question? Any more questions? Do you want to move on to, yes?
So you mentioned the American extreme. Is that a subject through line through most of your work? And also,
That's the first time I've ever said that. Do you guys think I should trademark that brilliant phrase?
Anyway. And even in this story, so we don't get to hear the most extreme part, but then you mentioned writing another story about a pedophile.
Mm-hmm.
When you're writing about such extreme things, are you ever fearful of going too extreme, alienating the writers in any way, or is that just no concern?
Yeah, I never do think about who's reading the work when I write it. I really do just write what I want to write in any given moment, and which usually just is like that which I haven't read yet, which I haven't personally read. It doesn't mean that it's like new to the world, but I just mean like what I haven't read yet, I want to make that thing on the page so I can read it. Although it's true that I don't sit there and pore over my own, wow, this is a really good book. I read this a couple times last year. It was really good. It's still good now. No. But I do want to just make something that that I'm excited to be making and stuff, since that usually means something that I feel I haven't seen yet. But extremes. I will confess that this particular pedophile story in this collection, I was kind of surprised that no one gave me trouble over it. In terms of Norton, my publisher, who, as you know, is they're very famous for doing a lot of anthologies that you read in college or whatever, and they're great. I love the people that I work with there, but I was so surprised that they just let me. They didn't say anything about this pedophile story. They weren't like, we have to take that out of the collection, because it really is, it's like porn. It's just bad. I don't mean it's bad like in a literary sense. I'm not one to judge that, but it's evil. It's kind of an evil piece of work, and I just thought, I was just delighted that they didn't excise it from the collection. So I am sometimes pleasantly surprised that people don't object to things more than they do, but I don't worry about it while I'm writing this stuff, because if I were the kind of person who could sort of write stuff and think about the audience, I'd probably be in a more lucrative field, like the movies or TV. So, yeah. But thanks for that question. Anything else? Also, if anyone wants to ask a private question or whatever, you guys can just come up after. I never like to put my hand up in a crowd, so if you want to come up to me afterward, that's fine too.
Well, thank you all for coming.